You gotta make coffee or have a cocktail if you're gonna listen to jazz shit. Mingus. Hey, it's Mazzy. Let's talk about some jazz reissues 2022. Now, I've been wanting to do this for a little while because we're in a massive renaissance of jazz reissues. Really like a second, third, fourth golden age of jazz. And a lot of people in the vinyl community on YouTube and just in the world in general are jumping in, all in on jazz. A lot of new friends I have and old friends who had never been in jazz before in the last few years as a result of the Tone Poets and the Acoustic Sounds reissues and going back a decade, 15 years, Music Matters Jazz and all these others. And I've showcased a lot of those. So, but this year alone, it's been 3 months, right? Not even 3 months. We're mid-March. And I just want to do a little bit of a shout out because today is the 13th of March. Yesterday was March 12th, the 100th birthday of Jack Kerouac. And I always associate the beat generation and the whole beat poetry thing with jazz. And growing up in San Francisco, one of my favorite places to hang out was North Beach, the Italian area, Upper Grant, kind of the epicenter of the beat generation, at least in the West Coast, San Francisco, with City Lights Books, Lawrence Ferlinghetti's place, Upper Grant. The Jazz Workshop used to be there. All these jazz clubs and the jazz scene there. And the beat scene was way before my time hanging out in North Beach. But with the coffee houses and the bars and even the strip clubs that came in the 60s, the Condor, where topless dancing was invented, I believe in 1964, Carol Doda, that's the infamous Carol Doda who started at the Condor. But I digress, we're getting into the music here. And I just want to go through a handful of the jazz LPs that I've gotten. All these, I believe, are all analog, beautifully cut, beautifully packaged. And, limited availability only because of the pressing backups. And unfortunately, some of these you can't get right at the moment. But these are not, except for maybe one limited edition record. Not all came out this year, but I've acquired them in the first 2-3 months here. And I want to start with an artist that I've known for years, but I really haven't jumped into. I've had on compact disc, and that's Eric Dolphy. And Eric Dolphy is considered sort of in the out there edge of jazz players. And he's a clarinetist, flautist. He plays a bass clarinet, he plays a B-flat clarinet, which is pretty much a standard clarinet. And it's just an amazing artist. Unfortunately died way too young, around 36, of an infusion in Europe when he had an issue and the hospital thought he was just another strung out junkie jazz musician, which was not the case. And apparently a combination of what they infused him with killed him, unfortunately. He was a protege and a friend of John Coltrane's and very influential. They influenced each other. But the Prestige series had come out like around 10 years ago, I believe, by Acoustic Sounds. All analog cuts, I believe mostly by Kevin Gray, possibly Bernie Grudman. I don't remember who did what, but they're coming out again in stereo and mono. They issued 25 in stereo, 25 in mono. Not all the same titles overlap. There's some different titles, and they're kind of rolling out as they compress them. And unfortunately, they go really fast. Who knows when they'll come back and print again? So I suggest go to Acoustic Sounds and these Analog Productions Prestige New Jazz series and some blues things as well. You have to kind of click the back order. And I'm not selling them a shill for them, but that's the only way you can get them because I doubt they can even get out to retailers or other sellers. But Eric Dolphy is someone who all of a sudden I've fallen in love with his musical style. He's not for the uninitiative. These are the 3 that have come out this year so far. And there is Outward Bound, Eric Dolphy, with a very surrealistic cover that emulates the music. And this is featuring Freddie Hubbard. Now, Freddie Hubbard, I'm a fan of, and I think there's a Tone Poet in this pile coming up. I consider him more straight ahead, bebop and hard bop. But he also has a mellow sound, which he developed more in the 70s, a little bit of a schmaltzy sound. But the Eric Dolphy Quintet, this is a larger entourage compared to a couple others I'm going to show here. And it's with Freddie Hubbard, Jackie Byard on piano, George Tucker on bass, and Roy Haynes on drums. And there are several cuts with Dolphy and Hubbard really in sync playing together. But it has a thicker, bigger sound for jazz. Beautiful record. It seems like a larger ensemble than it is, but I love this one. Out of the three, it's not my favorite, but it's highly recommended there. Then there's Eric Dolphy, Far Cry with Booker Little trumpet on here. And again, Ron Carter is on bass on here, who would later be a member of the great second quintet with Miles Davis. And this is out there as well, and it is more flamboyant, more energetic, but a really nice record. But again, not for the faint of heart, but it's not pushing it. Some of Dolphy's stuff really pushes it and really gets out there. So it's not that inaccessible, but this is Far Cry with Booker Little by Eric Dolphy. Out of the three here that have come out, this is the one that I suggest with this beautiful cover painting that's reminiscent, and I'm blanking it on the artist right now, but it's very reminiscent of Salvador Dali, obviously, but it's not Dali. And someone's going to write in the comments who painted this. But out there, and it is an out there album, but what I like about this, it has a jazzy / neoclassical feel to it, because you got two bass players essentially. You got a Joy DeViver on DeVivier. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but on bass. You got Roy Haynes on drums again. But you got the addition here of Ron Carter playing the cello. And I always loved Ron Carter's cello playing. It brings a classical sound to this. This, in a way, is surreal, but it's smooth. And not smooth in the sense of a downer or smooth jazz light. It's not light by any stretch of imagination, but it's such a beautiful sounding album. And that cello brings an extra level of warmness that I just think is wonderful. And this is a gorgeous, gorgeous record. This has been in my turntable more than any other album in the last couple weeks since I received it from Acoustic Sounds. Just love this. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Out of all these records, right now, in this moment, this is my favorite. Also in the Acoustic Sound series that came and went very quickly is Soul Train. This is one of the few prestige dates that John Coltrane, almost forgot his name, John Coltrane did. And it's got a soulful jazz feel. Of course, it's got Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Arthur Taylor on drums. If you can find this and pick this up, it's a wonderful record. It's accessible. It's not what some would consider and call Coltrane's squeaky period, when he started like really blowing and pushing, and then later would get into the soprano saxophone, which I believe Miles Davis gifted to him when he was leaving that quintet. But this is another one from that great series. And since we're on the trail here of John Coltrane, the Impulse 60 series, an audiophile acoustic sound series that's coming out, it's rolling out throughout the years. It started about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And these two Coltrane albums, I believe, came out in January. There's Live at the Village Vanguard, and this is from 1962. Now, this date is amazing. This recording is amazing. And on it is John Coltrane, McCoy Tyner, Reggie Workman, and Elvin Jones. And I'm fortunate enough, I never saw Coltrane, unfortunately. I was too young. He died before I was able to see him. Never saw Dolphy either. But I did see McCoy Tyner as a leader in San Francisco several times at the Keystone Corner, and I've seen Elvin Jones as a leader many times because he would come back to the Keystone again. And what a powerhouse, wonderful drummer. But what's also beautiful about this, on the opening track, the track which is called Spiritual, which is literally that, it's added by Eric Dolphy on bass clarinet, and you can see Coltrane getting in that sort of spiritual feel in 1962 on this. The later track at the end of that is Softly as in a Morning Sunrise, the Hammerstein, Romberg, sort of standard, and it's just a beautiful, it's a la what he would record when he recorded ballads for Impulse Records. And the side 2 is the entire 16 minutes of Chasing the Train. So he blows it out there. When he recorded this in 62 at the Village Vanguard, it didn't get great reviews. People were thinking that artists like Dolphy and Coltrane at that time, in this period, in this sound, was so far out there, it was like non-jazz, and it was that he was escaping the confines of jazz. But again, jazz is improvisational in a way at times. You get the basic melody, you get the basic tune, the song, and then you go with it. And obviously Coltrane, obviously later Miles Davis, and especially Eric Dolphy really did that. And this is a great album. But side 2, there's a lot of that squeaking and out there, but it's still a beautiful, beautiful record. And I highly recommend it. If you're a Coltrane fan, I wouldn't start with these records, if you don't know Coltrane. But this one is also good. Crescent. This is 1964 date. Early 64, this is probably spring 64. This was recorded and released at the end of this year. I think it was in November, December. He records what would be one of his most famous albums, A Love Supreme. I think it came out in January the following year. But you really kind of have the feel here. There's some straight ahead stuff on here. There's Crescent, there's Bessie Blues. He's got this blues fusion thing. There is a drum thing on side 2 with Elvin Jones. So if you're not a fan of jazz drum solos, you might kind of skip the last track, but it's still really well recorded, beautiful sounding record. There's some gorgeous melody. The opening on side 2 is Lonnie's Lament. And again, a wonderful record, but it's so interesting to see what he did early in 1964 and how he progressed, and really how A Love Supreme sort of changed things, really shook things up, and is considered one of his iconic albums. This Impulse was after he was on Atlantic. Before that, made a series of albums on Atlantic Records. And then before that, obviously Prestige, as I showed with Soul Train. Now, you heard a little Mingus here from the Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, from the 60th anniversary again of Impulse. Mingus ×5 is a gorgeous record. Now, Mingus is one of the great jazz composers, probably alongside Duke Ellington, and he's got the Big Little Band here, or the Little Big Band. It has this full sound, it's like a small orchestra, jazz orchestra ensemble. And I mean, Charlie Mingus, Jackie Baird, Eric Dolphy's on here again. He keeps popping up on these records, and so many others. And he does Mood Indigo, which is probably the most straight ahead of the tunes on here, the great, beautiful ballad by Duke Ellington. And just a wonderful, wonderful record. Theme for Lester Young, obviously Lester Young, Pork Pie Hat. This is not a pork pie hat, but one of my favorite of the bebop period of saxophonists. Obviously, for me, Charlie Parker is my #1 all-time jazz artist. But these 2 records, what you saw here at the beginning of this video, and Mingus, I promised myself I wasn't going to say it 5 times because I might turn into something else, is a fantastic record. Mingus is unique. He jolts with the unexpected and the new. He does have an out there sound that's very noirish. Even though this was recorded in, let's see, when did this come out? 1964. I keep thinking, I wasn't into jazz until 1970. I heard a little bit before that, but 1970 with Bitches Brew and then Beyond, Stanley Turrentine and Milt Jackson on the album Cherry on CTI, which is very commercial, but very beautiful. the closest I heard of these are reruns of Naked Gun and those TV shows where they used a lot of music that, like these jazz artists, or at least arranged by Hollywood versions of these jazz artists. And Mingus is definitely one, and it's beautiful music. One of the most obviously important composers in jazz ever. With the jazz renaissance of audiophile records, you can't deny Tone Poet. And Tone Poet literally is Joe Harley. And Joe Harley and Ram Rambach started this whole thing off really over 15 years ago, plus, I guess, with Music Matters Jazz and those reissues. And that audiophile, when vinyl wasn't even, which was a very slim, hanging on to the vinyl, vinyl records. And those records go for a lot of money now. There's very few still in print. You have to buy them in the resale market. I fortunately bought most of them while they were coming out at reasonable prices. And you could argue about reasonable prices. We're talking $40, $45, and then, some more when the SRXs came out. But I'm not getting into the whole pressing thing on this video. Really, this is about the music. Even though these are audiophile records, they're audiophile records and they sound good because of the music is great. The music was well recorded for the most part by Rudy Van Gelder and others, mostly by Rudy Van Gelder in a lot of these cases, not exclusively. But this is about the music. So, I wish these records were easily available for everyone. But again, Joe Harley was able to continue the success of the Music Matters Jazz in a different venue. And that's when Don was the president of Blue Note, brought him on and said, hey, we want you to do what you do at Music Matters Jazz. Because basically Blue Note had been kind of screwing up with their pressings. Not only that were they digital, which is, in its own form, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they were pressed badly. The covers were mediocre. And Joe Harley, to his credit, said, yeah, I'll do it, but I have to do it my way. My printer, my cutting engineer, and so on. And of course, I think in terms of the masses and the larger audience of jazz, Joe Harley and the Tone Poet, and then the subsequent classic series and Blue Note 80s that were slightly cheaper by $10, and audiophiles still, maybe not the great covers, really push this forward, and we have a lot of new jazz fans. And you out there are buying jazz records, and all you bought was a Savoy Brown record before that, right? Or Maggot Brain, which is a great record. Well, these are all great records. I'm not going to be snobby because I'm a rock guy, obviously, as you know. But these are some of the recent Tone Poets. Now, compared to the Dolphys, compared to those Coltranes, you could say these are safer. These are easier. So these are a great series of albums to get into if you're new to jazz. And recently is Rough and Tumble, Stanley Turrentine. Again, as I said, Stanley Turrentine's Cherry album with Milt Jackson on Vibes is one of the first albums, probably the second jazz album I got. It's beautiful. It opens up with Lee Morgan's song, what's the name of that song on Cherry? Speedball. And it's a great song. And I bought it because they were playing it in the stereo store where I bought my very first component system, and it sounded fantastic. It's really great. And it's a slick album, but Cherry, CTI Records, find a copy, find an OG. Love it. Creed Taylor produced. But Rough and Tumble, Stanley Turrentine. This is one of his larger ensemble albums. Now, he comes at this point, you saw him earlier with Eric Dolphy, where he was doing something a little more out there. But he really comes from a blues side of things. He's the blues side of jazz. So you got more blues. He was married to Shirley Scott, the great jazz organist as well. But on here you got Blue Mitchell trumpet, James Spaulding alto, Stanley Turrentine tenor sax, Peter Adams baritone sax. So you got this front line of horns and reeds, 4 of them. So you get that more big band orchestrated sound in a bluesy form. You got the great Grant Green on guitar, McCoy Tyner on bass, Bob Crenshaw on bass, and Mickey Roker on drums. There's a Sam Cooke song here, Shake. Burt Bacharach song, Walk On By, the infamous song made famous by Diana Warwick as well. And this is a Ray Charles song as well, but this is a really lovely record, and the Tone Poets have the gatefold with the Francis Wolff photographs taken at the sessions. If there are sessions, they add a gatefold. Again, these beautiful covers. And this is a bigger band record, not an intimate record, but it's very accessible, Stanley Turrentine. Also amongst my favorite, and I was reading some of the forums about things coming out, and people didn't seem to want to go for this as much. Now, Joe Pass is a great guitarist. He worked on soundtracks and movies. He obviously, on his later years, was re-signed by Norman Granz for Pablo Records and did a series of wonderful records with Ella Fitzgerald. And he just has a really smooth guitar sound. And I love Joe Pass. So this is a very easy record to enjoy. This is a very safe record, but it doesn't diminish the quality of the record or the enjoyment of the music. And of course, one of my all-time favorite guitar players, aside from Ry Cooder, was Django Reinhardt. And this is Joe Pass, Songs for Django. Mostly the songs were written by Django, except there's a John Lewis song called Django, which was a tribute to Django. John Lewis played with the Modern Jazz Quartet. And it's got a Joe Pass original called For Django. And fantastic record. It's not a gatefold, it's a Tone Poet. And this was on originally, I think this was on Pacific Jazz Records, which was the West Coast jazz sound of artists like Chet Baker. And Blue Note through Tone Poet, is not only doing Blue Note reissues, they're doing some from Pacific Jazz, which was acquired over the years by Blue Note and subsequent United Artists. And there's a whole, now Universal, everything Universal. Universal owns the universe, it seems. Another one which is considered safe and some people are staying away from, but don't. If you like Latin jazz, this is a beautiful record. This is Grant Green, the Latin bit. And this has Wendell Marshall, Willie Bobo on drums, Potato Valdez on conga, and Garvin Massot. Beautiful cover, beautiful photograph. Again, it has session photos from the session. This originally was recorded in 1963, so it kind of comes a little bit around that time, maybe predates a little bit of the Brazilian Renaissance with Getz and Gilberto, João Gilberto, Astrid Gilberto, and Stan Getz. There's a Latin sound. I know later Hugo Montenegro came out of that too, and a lot of artists. Willie Bobo, obviously. Monto Santa Maria did a great series of records, and very commercial. It's a very appealing sound, a really lovely record. So, the jazz, for certain jazz purists, this might be a little too safe, but you need to get into it, get somewhere. You're not going to start off probably with an Eric Dolphy record, although I still think that album out there. I think if you like even neoclassical, you like ambient, but it's more than that. It's so gorgeous, in my opinion. Sticking with this same feel, this is a Blue Note Classic series, so you don't have the great cover, but still, this is basically your normal, and this is a gatefold cover. This is Lee Morgan, the great Lee Morgan, and this is Caramba. Again, Lee Morgan, Bernie Maupin, who would play with Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis, Cedar Walton, Reginald Workman, and Billy Higgins. And this is from 1968, so it's right in that kind of soul jazz Latin feel. And I recommend this. It's just a fun record. You don't have to get snooty and say it needs to be out there, or it can't be melodic and fun, or just party time music. That's the best thing about all this music, I think. The last two are, I'm going a different direction now. And one of my favorite labels of the last couple years is Sam Records out of France. Most of the recordings are either unreleased or were only released on labels like Barclay Records in France in the day, and they're usually from the late 50s, early 60s. And this is Donald Byrd, Bobby Jaspar, who is a sax flautist. And there's several Bobby Jaspar records on Sam that I am in love with. It's got that great flute playing. I'm a fan of a jazz flute if it's done right. One could argue that Herbie Mann not wearing a shirt in jazz is not done right, but that's another thing. I actually like some Herbie Mann records, and Hubert Laws. Some people thought his stuff was kind of too schmaltzy on CTI records. He did Rite of Spring and some others, but it's really cool. But this gets in the more jazz thing. This is, I would say, a little challenging, not so much. But the Bobby Jaspar record, I forgot the name on Sam, is just stupendous and really great. These are really great. Look at that picture of Donald Byrd. Look how young he is there in France with some fans. Flute Bop by Bobby Jaspar is on here. I Get a Kick Out of You, the Cole Porter song, opens up this date. And I believe this was a live recording at the Cannes Jazz Festival. This was recorded in 1958. So anything on Sam Records, I highly recommend. I pick up pretty much everything now. I don't have their full catalog, but they've done several Donald Byrd records, and they're all fantastic. And lastly, this is not a new record, and it's a hard record to get. And I got it from Patrick, the vinyl archivist. I purchased it because I do have about 75 plus Music Matters Jazz. This is one I didn't have, he was selling it. And this is Blue Note 1524, Roundabout Midnight at the Cafe, Bohemia by Kenny Dorham. And this is a double 45 album. This is where the whole concept of the Francis Wolff photographs and the gatefold came about that Joe Harley brought to Tone Poet, to Blue Note. The entire Francis Wolff archive of photographs was purchased some years ago by Michael Kuskuna and his wife. Michael Kuskuna is a great jazz archivist. He ran Blue Note for a number of years in the 70s, I believe, and into the 80s, and fantastic record. He has the great, obviously, Night in Tunisia is on here, Roundabout Midnight. This has, obviously, Kenny Dorham on trumpet, J.R. Monterose on tenor sax, Kenny Burrell on guitar, Bonnie Timmons piano, Sam Jones bass, and Arthur Edgehill on drums. And fantastic. I go back and forth. I'm not a huge fan of the double 45 thing. You know, the whole idea of getting up, and it's not the laziness, but it's the flow of the music. And if you do, obviously, the AB of 45 versus a 33, you're going to hear the difference on a decent stereo of the 33 versus the 45. The 45 will definitely have the edge. However, nobody's AB in records when you're just enjoying the music. It's the music, baby. If you're enjoying the music, and just let it play. So I want to say too, in the last week, good solid week, I've had this new, if you watch my videos, Hegel H390 integrated amplifier, and oh my God, huge difference, especially on this kind of well-recorded jazz music. And in the end, I want to give a shout out. This T-shirt, someone asked about it in a photograph. This is a T-shirt, sort of a self-portrait, not of me. Of course, it could be like a weird. Anyway, it's an artist, a graffiti artist, painter named Scott Cowgill, who's in the Bay Area. I met Scott years ago through my friend, the archivist, and she, as a gift, supported the artist and got me this shirt, and I really love it. This is kind of this graffiti icon he's been using for a long time. It shows up in a lot of his paintings, and it's definitely a stylistic self-portrait, but it's really, like, come on. I thought it'd be appropriate for this scene, for jazz. So jazz, just great jazz, great sounding music, and it's about the music. Remember that, not about having this 16 pressings or something. Now, that's a good question, and people have asked me. I don't double up very often. I don't get every pressing of all these jazz to compare it and do AB. And other channels, other collectors do, and I think that's amazing. And not to say that I don't have any. And, you know, I have probably 4 copies of A Kind of Blue and of Love Supreme. But all these type of records, I don't think I don't have any doubles on these, and I will never have any doubles. And again, it's not a criticism of anyone else. You want to do that, that's your your hobby, all the power to you. So enjoy the jazz music, enjoy the music. Check out There. If you can hear a good version of it, it's friggin' amazing. Now, you might want to stream it first just to see, but if you can do it on a decent system, not just a little headphone, iPhone thing, I would suggest try to find a copy of Out There. If you know my taste, if you like psychedelic music, it's nothing like psychedelic music. But if you like challenging things, but not the kind of out there, it's not like the Coltrane squeaky things where if your ears are not attuned, it's really soothing and it's really beautiful night music. And I'm going to go put it on again right now. I love it that much. I can't get that record off the turntable. Well, it is off the turntable now, but I can't keep it off. That's the term. Anyway, Mazzy loves you. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Half of you are not subscribing, so if you like this stuff, just subscribe. It doesn't cost you a dime. You don't have to push that bell. You could like it. That would help. But I really appreciate it, and take care. Next time.